because business is fundamentally based on trust, the software that we develop and we support has to do the same thing. And so that leads to the next question, which is, what is business risk? Because of course, as a business person, all of you on a daily basis are making decisions about what risk is acceptable in your business. Because when you have to do something, you cannot do everything, that's just impossible. And so you're always having to decide, what is the risk? And is that an acceptable risk to the business? And I try to highlight some extreme examples of what business risk is, because I just wanted to illustrate the point here. And if you look up in the top right-hand corner, that is Concorde. That was when Concorde unfortunately had its one and only accident in its entire life. It was taken off from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, and it hit some debris on the ground that had fallen off from a previous plane. And unfortunately, the fuel tank ruptured, and the plane crashed, and sadly, everybody died on it. And that was a terrible incident. Thankfully, it was the only one. Flying, of course, is a very safe thing to do. But from a business risk point of view, that had very wide implications to the airline industry and the two airlines involved, British Airways and Air France, because this was their flagship plane. Even though not many people flew on it, it was their flagship plane, and everybody knew about them. And so that caused a lot of problem. Now, that was probably a business risk that they hadn't quite considered, but nevertheless, it was something they had to spend a lot of money on and try to fix. Other examples, for example, in the shipping industry, or in fire, that's obviously a risk as well. Or recently in the banking world, Silicon Valley Bank went out of business and had a run on the bank. But the most important one that we all are aware of is the risk inside the software, which is the bug. And how do you find that? And how do you somehow relate that back to the people that are using the software? And how do you understand that as a business risk? And the cost of a cybersecurity incident, well, hopefully not many of you in this room have actually had to deal with this, but I know from experience of working with our customers that if you ever have a cybersecurity incident, it's extremely stressful. And it is not something you ever want to have, because there's many, many consequences of that, and these are not in a particular order, but they're all very serious. And so, lost customers, if you have a cybersecurity incident and your customers lose trust in you, they may never come back. Reputational damage, if something happens to your software or software that you're developing, it can have severe damage to a reputation, just like in the airline industry when Concorde crashed. And unless you've actually been involved in one of these, you may not quite appreciate how damaging that can be and how intense that can be. And then, of course, there's opportunity cost, so system downtime. Again, if you've ever had a cybersecurity incident, you know that you've immediately got to go into a recovery mode. You've got to potentially shut down systems because you don't know what the blast radius is going to be, how much damage is going to be. And then you have to do remediation, but you can't just simply stop your business. And so how do you deal with these? Well, there's more than I've put on the list here, but the point is that if you were the managing director of a company, or if you were perhaps on the board of directors, these are things you could actually relate to. Now, if somebody said to you, well, when we have a bug, that's difficult for us to go and diagnose and so on, they may not be able to understand those. But when you say to them, look, we could have intense reputational damage, or we could have lost customers or opportunity costs, those are things that they can relate to. And what I've seen over the past 20 years is that what we have been trying to do as an industry is getting that conversation closer to senior business leaders. And I think that is something that we try very hard to do. Of course, we're all technical people at heart, and that's okay. But many of our business colleagues are not technical people. They don't come from a technical background. and therefore it's hard for them to relate to the things that we might be saying. So I think it's very important for us to put it in business terms. And one of those things that you could talk about, which you may understand, is the cost of a vulnerability. And I'm highlighting this because when we look at the software development lifecycle, and we'll be talking about that today, as you know, there's different ways that you can actually fix problems. The best way is not to have any in the first place. So if you can do security by design, that's the ideal scenario, but the reality is that we have human beings in the system today, and human beings are usually always the weakest link. And as the life cycle of the software goes on, the relative cost of it goes up all the way to the end. Here we can see software has been released. That is probably not when you want to be discovering problems, because it's extremely expensive to fix, and you may even have to take a system down. And so when you are trying to convince your management or your managing director or somebody else, or even your finance officer, that you need more money to be able to invest in putting, let's say, security into your software development lifecycle, this is the sort of information that is helpful to explain why it's better if you invest more upfront. And then, of course, the cost of a data breach, and this information is public information, and it's quite well known, but it's shocking nevertheless when you look at how much do data breaches cost. And there's some examples there of different industries, so healthcare, financial, pharmaceuticals, and so on. But have a look at the number at the bottom. An average mega breach, almost $400 million. Well, a mega breach is defined as a breach that's got in excess of 100 million records, which unfortunately those do happen. And those costs are made up of a number of different factors, including the reputational damage, including the remediation, and the sorts of things that you have to do. But the numbers are very, very big. Now, of course, data breaches don't just happen because of insecure software. They quite often happen because of problems inside your network. But ultimately, what a hacker's trying to get to is to the data. And the path to get to the data, once they've got through the network perimeter, is actually through the application. And so if your application's got vulnerabilities in it, then they're going to find that. And you have to try to manage that situation. And that is ultimately going to be a business risk. Now, the other side of this equation, this is something that I hear quite a lot. I remember I was talking to the CIO of the largest insurance company in Germany a few years ago. Actually, it was when we were doing the final stages of creating a secure software development lifecycle program for him. I said to him, if there's one thing that I can do to help you to sleep well at night, what is it? And he said, it's help me to maintain business velocity. And what he meant by that was that he was under a lot of pressure to build and release new systems to support the business. So the insurance company might decide that they're going to, let's say, allow people to submit a claim for an accident online using an app. And that program involves developing the software, but it also involves a lot of marketing campaigns and sales campaigns to advertise it. And once they've announced that, and they've said we're going to launch it on a particular date, there's no going back from that point. You cannot stop a marketing campaign just because the software is going to be released late. And so he said that his biggest challenge was maintaining business velocity. And it was always his fear that with the pressure of the demands from the business, his teams were going to take some shortcuts. And that would then result in a massive problem, which would be a business risk, very visible for him as the CIO. And so I think trust in software and systems is absolutely critical. It's critical for our own colleagues, it's critical for our business leaders, and it's very, very critical for our customers. And when I look at the volume of software that's being developed today, which is getting larger and larger, and of course now we hear that AI is going to develop software. Scott is going to talk about that in his closing keynote, so there's some interesting things there for you to take away and think about. But I think people are becoming more conscious of software, and software is really at the heart of every single thing that we do today. And so maintaining that trust in software and systems is collectively our responsibility. And I think as we think about it in terms of business risk, it really helps us to put it into perspective. And so just to take that a little bit further, if you're asking yourself, why is software risk a business risk? Well, I think it's fairly simple to try to explain to people. And the statement is, if every company is a software company or is going to become a software company, then problems in your software create risk in your business. And I guess we can all imagine that every company is becoming a software company. Take the automobile industry, for example, and look at any of the modern cars today, and take a few minutes to think about what's going on, and then you realize that without software, that car just wouldn't be functioning. And actually, the automobile industry is moving more and more to a point of more software and higher integration within the elements inside the car, because they realize that when you look at something like a Tesla, for example, which is very much a software-based car, that is the future of what cars are going to look like, and ultimately probably all transportation. And when I talk to our customers and I ask them what keeps the security teams and the development teams up at night, they put this into three categories. First of all, software security. It goes without saying that that's something that is very much top of their mind. And why do they worry about that? Because they inherently know the problems that there are in software. And so they just know that you have to have secure software. If you go to development teams, it's all about development velocity. And if you look at how development has changed over the years, mostly it has been about increasing development velocity through the use of automation, through tools for automation. And now we have very sophisticated tools to help us to do that, and the methodologies are designed to be able to support that as well. And so if you talk to a typical developer, they probably will tell you that their biggest challenge is meeting the deadlines that have been given to them to do the software. So then if you go back to the security team, the challenge that they have is trying to convince the developers to take software security seriously. And that's where we all come in, which is how do we bring those together so that those two become a seamless operation. And that leads us to the business risk, which I've mentioned before, which is that if we do not manage software security and we do not allow the developers to maintain their velocity whilst building secure software, then the business is very, very much at risk. So one of the hottest topics that we have today, which I think feeds right into this, is software bill of materials. And this has become a very high focus topic because a couple of years ago, the president in the United States created an executive order, and one of the key elements of that was software supply chain risk management, and software bill of materials is one of the elements of that. And so bill of materials, if you go to the physical world, for example, if you are building a car or a plane, then the bill of materials is very, very important. Because, for example, in a plane, every single component, right to the last nut and bolt, has an identity. Which means that if an accident or an incident happens, they can actually find out where was this particular bolt made and what was the batch that it was made in, and they can go and analyze it. They know what the composition of the metal was, and they need that because that's how they maintain the high degree of safety in the plane. And so we're moving to a world where we have to do exactly the same thing in software, but it's very complicated. And one of the main reasons why it's complicated is because in the software world, we have very much an open source mentality, and that's been instrumental in helping the software world to get to where it is today. And that open source mentality, on the one hand, has unlocked a lot of potential, but on the other hand, it has created a scenario where it's quite difficult for us to be sure about exactly where is our software coming from. And there's several incidents that have happened that have brought us to really truly understand this. Log4j is the most recent ones. So I would imagine that at least half of you in this room today, software bill of materials is a hot topic for you. And we'll hear more about that during today, but I think this is just one side of how do we manage business risk. And I think if you go to a senior manager inside a company, they probably understand the concept of bill of materials. So you can quite easily extend that to software bill of materials. So you have to build trust in that software supply chain, and it's not about open source, it's also about third-party components that your team uses. Because you may be developing your own software, most likely you have a high degree of open source, but you may also have third-party components there. And that's complicated in terms of making sure that you understand exactly what software you have there and whether or not when you hear about a new vulnerability, for example, when Log4j happened, can you quickly identify where your software is impacted by that? And building trust in your software really comes to the heart of why we're all here today. This is what we specialize in. This is what we think about 24 hours a day. We go to sleep at night dreaming about building trust in software. At least I know I do, because I think that this is a journey that we're all on that's going to take quite a long time because there are so many interconnected pieces. And so I think it starts with us here in this room today. This is one of the main reasons why we wanted to bring the community together, because we want to help to elevate the discussion about software to the business risk level. So it's not just seen as a technical concern. And software application security is evolving. There's no doubt about that. But I think we have a way to go. And I hope that in the talks that we have today, you will get some inspiration in terms of how you can look at your own organizations and see, is there something that you can do to help to increase the awareness of this? And the requirements come from many different stakeholders. So they come from the developers. Obviously, the developers are key here because they're building the code. They come from the teams that are operating all of the development environment, the DevOps teams. They come from the security teams. And then we also have the business stakeholders as well that we mustn't forget. Our vision is quite simple. It's to continue to innovate and to provide integrated solutions and services to help you to continue to transform the way that you design, build, test, and deliver software. And as you know, we have a wide portfolio of solutions that we help to do this. And through today's event, we want to create a user group community where we widen the discussion and we get people and we help people to think about this in terms of the business to try to move it to the next level. Because I think that for me is still one of the missing points, which is making sure that our business leaders are truly on board with the role that we play and with the risk that we are helping to mitigate by making sure that software is developed securely and positioning that in terms of why that is important to the business. We provide a very comprehensive application security portfolio. We continue to update this. Sometimes those are incremental updates because a particular technology is being updated in the normal way. Sometimes it's fairly fundamental in terms of new concepts that we're introducing. And Scott is going, Scott is going to talk about this later on today. and we'll give you some insight into some of the things that we're thinking about for the future. And I think one of the reasons why Gartner positioned us in the top right-hand quadrant is because of the vision. So that Gartner's measurements are vision and ability to execute. And that vision aspect is very, very important as much as the ability to execute. So I wanted to just finish by leaving this image in your minds. That is, if you recognize that, it's supposed to be a semiconductor design. Those are supposed to be all the bits of the semiconductors. And in the early 90s, the person, or one of the two people that was the inventor of the first commercial web browser, a person called Mark Andreessen from a company called Netscape, he just said to somebody, software will eat the world. And so, of course, we see that today, but that wasn't obvious 20 years ago. And a few years ago, I happened to be in his office, and I saw this on the wall. It was a big, it was a print that they've done. So I quickly took a picture of it, because I thought I love that photo, because it really sums up, for me, what we see happening. More and more software being developed, and the complexity of that software is going up, because the business is demanding it. Unfortunately, the attackers, the people that are trying to break into that software, they're becoming more sophisticated, they've got more resources available, and yet there is no stopping the development of software. So I think it's fair to say that software is very definitely eating the world. So, thank you.